Hey, welcome to Co-op Dayton Conversations. I am here with so many people, but I'm talking to three amazing legends. They'll probably be a little humble about it, but these are three legends, and I want them to introduce themselves as we get started. And Carl, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Carl Kennebrew. I'm the international president for IUE CWA, which is the manufacturing division of CWA.
My name is Cheryl Scroggins, and I am the former program coordinator for Montgomery County's local Office of Minority Health, which was with Public Health Dayton Montgomery County and funded by the Ohio Commission on Minority Health.
And last but not least,
Hi, my name is Erica Bruton Delaney, and I am the former lead organizer of Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative.
thank you guys for sharing. Just to remind everyone why we're here, we're taking these conversations and taking this time to really understand the history of Gem City Market Co-op Dayton, the co-op community that has been building. And so these conversations is just giving us a little more insight into what it took to get to where we are today, and how we can take these things and the lessons we've learned to move into the future. So if you're watching this, thank you so much for watching and being in tune and just really wanting to understand the history of everything that we got going on. I am just like you. I'll be learning a lot today. So don't think that you're a newbie or anything like that. I am learning too. So I do want to pass it to you guys. And I want to start off with the question is, you guys told us what you're doing right now, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and then like your role in supporting the vision of Co-op Dayton and Gem City Market? Where did it all begin for you in this space? And Erica, we can start with you.
As I stated previously, I was the former organizer for Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative. And for me, Co-op Dayton kind of sprang forth from the Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative. It was a group of people who are very much interested in having a positive impact on their community. We would come monthly to talk about concerns and issues we saw in the community. And we all had a sense, there's some things that are not quite right, or there's things that need to be addressed, but how can we best address those issues in a real way? There's a lot to cover. What can we do to be a positive impact in our community and really know what we know? And it was really Cheryl Scroggins who had this ingenious idea to ask for assistance to get real hard data about what's going on in our community through the opportunity maps, which was done by OSU. And it's a long story, quite honestly. It really started with that precipice of really wanting to find hard data behind what we were feeling. And I will say for me, a personal story that really tipped it for me was Cheryl Scroggins' presentation at MVOC about the predeterminants of health and how so many things really contribute to poor health in the Black community. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm getting emotional about this, but that really kicked off the need to really getting hard data about what was going on. And so she availed herself and really took that step forward to get OSU on board with helping us out to get the hard numbers. My apologies, I did not expect that.
No, I think that's real. I think when we talk about the impact of discrimination, racism, all the things, hunger, and how a lot of it is intentional and it is emotional. And sometimes when you get in this work, you're in it so long that sometimes you can maybe disassociate or so yeah, no apologies necessary at all, because I think that's what it requires. So One thing that you just said, and I'm about to get her off script, and Carl and Cheryl, please, this is totally a conversation. Don't worry about interrupting or anything. Is getting the hard data behind what we feel. Why is that important? What does that prove? What does that do?
I think I can comment on that. The data was so important because you have to make a case for the work that you want to do. And it's so important to inform people, to educate people, to really speak with people in a way that is genuine and authentic and really speaks to their condition. And as the coordinator for local office of minority health, I was privy to sit in a lot of rooms where they were sharing the data, the Kerwin Institute for the Ohio State University, the Ohio Commission on Minority Health, and even Public Health Dayton Montgomery County played instrumental roles because we have epidemiologists at the local health department. We would have conversations around data, and I would sit in the room like, how can I bring this to the community? I can visualize the need. And that really was the nexus for bringing opportunity maps to Montgomery County. So I'm working with all these wonderful data sources and our own epidemiologists at Public Health. We were able to create these wonderful maps and go into the community with the purpose, the intent of informing and educating and empowering the community to address these issues. And it was really emotional. The times that I would present and have to hold back my own tears, and sometimes I couldn't, because people would weep. Would they not, Erica?
They would.
With the realization of the visualization of their condition. It's one thing to say, I have diabetes, there's infant mortality, there's food insecurity, children are hungry. And another thing to actually see the data on maps that show where the areas are in the census tracts or the zip codes that actually demonstrate with data, with hard facts, the need.
Yeah.
And the opportunity maps were also important because resources were limited. Everybody didn't have buckets of money or even staff or even a whole bunch of people working together in the community. People were working, but they were working and scattered. I'm over here, you're over there. But the opportunity maps brought people together and allowed them to really see how they could work together to address specific things. So that meant that they were using resources more effectively too. I want to say it was one of the most rewarding pieces of work I was able to do in the community was to roll the opportunity maps out. And it wasn't met without some pushback because it was just so visual and politicized to a certain extent because even the leaders of the community had a role in understanding what the numbers were saying. And some of it was embarrassing. Nobody wants to say people in Dayton are hungry or there's an infant mortality problem, but the data demonstrated it. So it was just hard to refute. And the data itself demanded change or at least attention. So
I love that. For anyone who is watching, I like to think I'm like the audience's brain. I will say the definition of an epidemiologist is a public health professional who studies the causes and spread of disease. So thank you for that word. But the other thing I want to dive into is just maybe Carl, are you able to describe what an opportunity map is? We're using this word, is very important. I still struggle to like truly understand what it is. I have a thought, but can you share what it is?
Sure. I want to give Cheryl and Erica their flowers now first to say that it was a piece of education that we had not accessed in labor before. And it really led to the point that we have been trying to make in labor for so many years of these companies like Kroger's. And that's really part of where the heartache came for us as labor is we see companies come in, they take advantage of the community, they make as much money as they can, they get tax breaks, and then they up and leave. And it broke my heart to see Kroger's on Gettysburg close at that time. And when I heard the report of how many children and how many people wouldn't have access to healthy food, Labor is made up of the community. And at the time, I was just a local leader in Dayton, but it was heartbreaking. What Cheryl did for us and so many people in MVOC was take something that we knew and put it on paper and make it factual. And that was very impactful. And that opportunity map is really, to me, the blueprint. If I just had to, as you say, for the people that are watching, as an education piece, it's a blueprint for where there are opportunities for us to do better. It's a blueprint for where there are opportunities for improvement. And at that time, there was a crisis. There was a food insecurity crisis and an infant immortality crisis, and all of it pointed to the point that we were hungry. Dayton was hungry and in need of help.
Thank you, Carl. So just to recap and let me know if I'm missing anything, an opportunity map shows where there's opportunity to improve, and indicators that show where those opportunities are have to deal with hunger, health, what attributes?
The opportunity maps that we had locally here, and pretty much all the opportunity maps for the state of Ohio that were being utilized by the local Office of Minority Health, show data sets and data points for health, education, housing, income, and transportation. And there may have been a few other generalized areas, but those were the 5 principal things: health, education, housing, income, and transportation. And if you could just visualize, like Carl said, a map of, let's say, Dayton, Ohio, and by census tracts or even by zip code or by the name of the different communities. Dayton is a very proud community, and we like to think everyone's doing well. But when you take data and you say what percentage of people are suffering from these particular conditions, maybe it might have been in education, it might have been the graduation rate in the high schools, or it might have been the number of kids who were passing some of the tests that were going on. You could literally see a map which communities by color code, maybe a percentage of success on one side to not as successful on the other side. You could look at it by color code and see exactly what was happening in every community. So you knew where to target your resources, and you knew where to target your effort. You knew where to call on the partners to come together and work together collaboratively.
And just to add to what Cheryl said, we also had a map about food insecurity. So the opportunity to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, etc., was also one of our maps that we had.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that Montgomery County was about the business of addressing food insecurity. There was a Montgomery County Food Policy Council, and I think all of us participated with that. But the community has the right to focus on its own needs, because the need in, say, Oakwood or Centerville or West Carrollton or Moraine might be different from the need in Trotwood, Jefferson Township, and Dayton View. West of the river or West Dayton has its own particular needs, and the West Dayton community wanted to work on its own needs. So we put together that effort. It really came about as a result of the Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative. The Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative was this wonderful group I loved working with because they were so well organized. And I work with a lot of groups. Miami Valley Organizing Collaborative was one of the groups that really did a good job of pulling people together and speaking about what was going on in the community in a very positive and impactful way. And so they were great to work with. They wanted to work on food insecurity. And I think it was Erica and Bill Dudley and Mayor Clay Dixon, Maha, and other partners who were around that table who were having this conversation about food insecurity, who came up with the bright idea of a co-op. And correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, but you and Bill went to talk to a food co-op in Cincinnati, did you not?
We did.
So I do want to say, sorry, before you go, Erica, we do also have a conversation with Ellen and from Co-op Cincy and Leela that also goes into great depth about just that. But Erica, I know that you did your thing and went out there and had those conversations, but I wanted to say that too, because this is a series. But Erica, please Give us your perspective.
Bill Dudley and I did go visit a co-op at the invitation of Ellen and Kristen. Now, Ellen and Kristen had presented the idea of a food co-op, I want to say maybe a year before. I was still working with the city of Dayton. I was a legislative aide for Commissioner Dean Lovelace, and that was the very first time it was a meeting set up by LEAD. And the lead organizer for LEAD said, you guys need to have a conversation with these ladies. They're starting a food co-op. And the city of Dayton had been trying to get a big box grocery store to come to the community because they were just leaving at mass. And eventually, it was in the back of my mind, oh, this co-op, we can do a co-op, we can do a co-op. But at the same time, I was trying to be mindful of what people were interested in doing. And when we finally got the opportunity maps in our hands, we were like, oh, food instability is a real thing. And then we found out we were third in the nation and having the largest food desert in the nation. We were third. Dayton, West Dayton in and of itself was third in the nation. And I was like, I have everything I need. We're going back to this food co-op idea. And so that really got the ball rolling because I could talk about a food co-op, but be honest, who really knows what a food co-op is? What does that look like? Why do we need one? But the work of MVOC and the work of the opportunity maps and the work of Montgomery County Public Health and all of the union assistance we've received really built this coalition of people who are interested in addressing this specific need. And so with that, Bill Dudley and I went to, I think it was it was supposed to be the Apple Street Market. And we went to the pre-development of that market. And we also went to a food co-op, like farmer's garden or something like that. And we learned so much. We were like, we can do this. At some point, we had a community meeting to present the opportunity maps. And we had 300 participants of just folks talking about the opportunity maps. It had already been disseminated out into the community. And we had individuals speaking about specific areas in the opportunity maps that related to them. So I think Shanice, who is now Commissioner Shanice Turner-Sloss, talked about housing. I'm trying to remember, does anybody else remember who spoke about what? Carl, do you remember?
Oh, God.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm trying to think back. While I'm trying to think it out, I want to give Atana Jacoby, who's a staff person from IUECWA, credit that she helped lead a lot of those community meetings. And at the time, Leela, who we're speaking about, was the general counsel for international. But back to your question, I'm trying to blame it on age.
Let's just say we had a lot of great in-depth
Yes, we did.
conversations.
Actually, that's a really good point. Can we put a timestamp on some of this stuff? Like when around was it 2015, 14 or earlier? So MVOC, I know that's before that, but when would you say the opportunity map started to come and you guys started to share and started to get the community's reaction?
I think it would have been probably somewhere around 2014 because I remember there being a report, it was a national report that was issued to the congressmen that had to do with food insecurity in the different states. And that's where Dayton was listed in like the top 10, like maybe number 3 or 4. Everyone was shocked that Dayton had people who were saying that they did not have enough food to feed their families on the regular. And we were like, Dayton? So we really began to dig our heels in and look at the data. But I think it was around 2014.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing. So that's, what is it, 2025? That's 11 years. And Carl, it's okay if you can't remember. Okay, so one thing you guys just talked about is like the opportunity maps going out to the community and everyone starting to see it and have their conversations and feelings. What kind of energy were these maps creating? Like, were people concerned? What reactions did you guys see? Were there any that surprised you or empowered you?
Carl, Erica?
I would say when we really started pushing to develop a co-op, and I would go to community meetings, I would often say that I would talk about predeterminate health and talk about infant mortality and make it personal to me. And the statistic I would say is that a white 18-year-old dropout had a greater chance of having a successful pregnancy than I would have. And I have a master's. And that really, it was a lot.
That would cause you to to understand why that was. And that's why the data was so important, because the numbers did not lie. You could actually see the impact of disparate health in the population, and you had to wonder why. And at the root, so then you had to get to root causes. And that's why the opportunities maps were so important, because they really identified root causes and gave the community. It's one thing to know you're suffering from a condition. I can tell you African American women have a higher mortality rate than a 17-year-old white female who doesn't have a high school education. What benefit is that to you if I can't tell you how to overcome that? So that was what the importance of not just having the information, not just having the data, not just having the maps, but having the ability to pull people to a table to have a conversation to help them understand what the root causes were, and then to have a deeper conversation about how can we plan and implement and take action to address these root causes. And that was the power of the opportunity maps, was to mobilize people to take action. Stop talking and take action. Mhm.
And I just want to add, I think it made it very tangible for people. They visually saw these grocery stores closing down. And then on the other end, everyone hears things being said like, oh, high blood pressure is hereditary, or diabetes is hereditary. And so I think what it did was, instead of making people feel like they didn't have any power, it actually empowered them to, they could do something different. It wasn't something you just had to deal with because you were a minority, or it wasn't something you were just forced to deal with because you lived in a certain community. I think that this coalition of different resources, and I think that it has so many different faces. The former mayor, Erica, Cheryl, Labor, there were so many faces saying the same message, that the community has the power to do something and you don't have to rely on the company. I think it was very impactful and game changing, and it also was saving lives.
Yeah.
I think one thing that also sticks out to me based on what you all are sharing, thank you so much, especially what Erica said about saying the stat at the beginning of meetings, is like, it also, I think people like to either disassociate, or not like to, have to disassociate. Or maybe if you have a car and you don't have to worry about walking to a grocery store, that's not your problem. That's not my problem. So I think what it sounds like to me is like the opportunity maps, the conversations helped everybody understand, like, it's everybody's problems, it's impacting everybody, and it's not just like a class kind of thing. It's not just like a them over there. Everybody is being impacted, and this is how, again, to that tangible data. I think that's what I think about. Okay, so now everyone has access to these maps and understanding. And now we're talking about building co-ops, and specifically a grocery store. Can we talk a little bit about that process, and maybe roadblocks experienced?
I want to say that in the process of trying to generate some action around a co-op, we came to realize that funding is needed. Funds, money. You need the support of your community leaders. You needed the city, you needed the county. I think it was really beneficial that the Montgomery County Food Policy Council members, and I'll say in Senator Tony Hall's office, were at the table with us and were a very important part of that conversation. I think initially when they joined us at the table, I was there representing public health, and I was really more like a facilitator of the dialogues, trying to keep everything moving and try to prevent there from being barriers to communication and things of that nature. But the community, one thing is important: the community has a right to organize. The community has a right to plan and address its own issues. Local leadership also has a right to want to be involved or to want to know what's going on, to link up with the community. So there was just this, it had to be this marriage of the community and the local leadership and what that was going to look like. And I think Gem City Market is the evidence of the success of having that conversation and coming out on the other side with an actual market, because it took money, it took fundraising, it took marketing, it took a lot of things that the community couldn't necessarily do itself. And leadership had to give a little bit so that they could work together. And I think that was an earmark of success, because the Gem City Market is an attestation. It stands as an attestation of having had a whole conversation.
I'm glad you said that, because I feel like for some people, especially on the outside looking in, that community political leader marriage relationship is needed to build something and build funds and garner that support. But from the outside looking in, it can look like, oh, now y'all working with a man and now it's not ours. I don't know. I think I can see where the confusion starts to, where the seeds of confusion starts to plant if people aren't very curious about the process. So I'm happy that we're elaborating on, okay, we have community support. We also have the support in this idea of working with local leaders to make sure that this happens and this has the funding it needs to thrive.
I say, just from a point of total transparency, it's a dance, because initially the community was planning, and when the Montgomery County Food Policy and Senator Hall's office arrived at the table, their thing was, why are you all doing this? We're doing this over here. And so we had to have a conversation with them to help them understand that the community has a right to plan and address its own issues. That was a whole conversation. And that's something they had to get over. And that's something the community pushback was, it was legitimate. But at some point in time, the community had to realize, hey, we don't have the thousands of dollars it's going to take. We need the land. We need all the permits. We need to be able to build. We don't have that kind of money in a bank. So we need leadership to help us with fundraising. So on either side, there was an opportunity for growth. And it just was a conversation that was difficult to have, but it was necessary to have. So the community does have to do some giving and some taking. And so does the leadership. Leadership has to do some giving and taking too. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like communication is important with that delicate relationship. What advice would you give to like community leaders when coming to work with community and listening to community needs? And then what advice maybe would you give to community when working with like community leaders and political figures?
For me, I think one is continued communication. It has to be consistent. And one of my favorite quotes is that minds are like parachutes. They only work when they're open. And I think that you have to have that open mind to do something different. Change is hard for people, and sometimes they'll continue to do something even though they know it doesn't work or it's wrong, just because that's the way that they've always done it. And so I think that having an open mind, being open to change, and consistent, constant communication and transparency are things that you need for success.
Like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Erica, what are your thoughts?
I guess my primary thought is, don't be afraid of no. I would say during this entire process, there were a lot of no's thrown out there initially. In some cases, hell no. And it was about the community being insistent about what we needed. And just moving forward with, okay, this is a no. How can we come together to make this work? Or what other avenues can we take? And then being mindful that this is a process that hopefully outlives us all. It's so much bigger than us. it's important that people lay aside their egos and do what's necessary to get the work done regardless. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations with political leaders or someone within the community. Those things happen, but continue to have those conversations. Consistently choose to do the hard thing.
Okay. Thanks, Erica. And I want to say, I've seen and heard about you putting your ego to the side and really focusing on the work. I just know there have been moments where you're just like, this is about the work. So that's all I'm here for. However, I need to move inside of doing this work. I definitely just really admire you from the stories I've heard and from everything that I've seen. I admire each one of you because y'all have built something. So speaking of this foundation that you guys have built and the momentum that was had, I remember going to the meetings. I talk about this story all the time, having Luke now and him being excited about co-ops, but that shows you like the time that has passed from 2014 to now, like the evolution of the work. We have seen a small dip in just like that fire that was had when we were in those conversations when there were 300 people in the room for a meeting, now dwindling down to about 20, 25 on a consistent basis, maybe 12. But like, how can we like rebuild and reignite off of what you guys have established? Like, how do we reignite that?
I think we have to acknowledge that COVID happened, and COVID interrupted a lot of community connections. We lost a lot of really good people. Organizations were impacted by that. But we cannot allow COVID to stop the forward progress. And it seems like the community is quieter than it used to be. I'm not sure that people aren't interested, but a lot of people had a lot to overcome. And it's just getting back to that forward motion and getting that momentum back. In the minority community, there are a lot of things that are just challenges. Food insecurity was a challenge. All the different types of health problems are challenging. Housing's challenging. There's challenges that have to be overcome on the regular. And I think those are some of the barriers that people face every day that prevent them from actually participating. I think social media has an impact too. I'm an older person. A lot of the younger people aren't necessarily in the same space. They're on social media. So we have to teach the older generation to engage with the younger generation on a digital platform like a Zoom or some of these other platforms that young people tend to use. And that prevents us from getting together as well.
I got you, Miss Cheryl. I'll come over your house and we'll make a TikTok today.
I know you all love that stuff. It's going to sound crazy. No, if I can say to you today that I do not have a TikTok account, and people will be like, what? And I don't use TikTok. I don't have a TikTok account. I have an Instagram, but there are people like me who don't use TikTok. People cannot believe that, but it's a choice. So if I want to engage younger people, I'm going to have to, TikTok?
Yes, got you. Erica or Carl, do you guys have thoughts about just the re-engaging, reigniting?
We have to meet people where they are. And that is probably a lot more like social media involvement. Like organizing has changed and we need to adapt with the changing times. I think we need to be a little more adaptive in how we engage younger people. And I say younger people not because this is a young person's game or anything like that, but if you look at any social movement, it's often driven by young people. It's not the people necessarily in their 30s or 40s or beyond who have jobs, families, and have a lot to risk. It really is about engaging people who are definitely like younger, who can step out of there and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this sit-in. I might get arrested, but this is what we're doing. So I would encourage people.
I can sit in that cell for a little longer. No.
Both of these two giants have said, I think we do have to be adaptive, and there isn't a one-stop shop. We have to do it in many different forms. And that means in person and on social media. And for some people, still making phone calls. I'm proud to say that even during the pandemic and since then, us as a labor union, we've had to adapt to how we organize. And we've done all these different things of text messaging and phone banks while also having in-person meetings. And we've been successful. So I know that it works. So I think that we have to, again, be open to change and do a new way and meet people exactly where they're at and where they're comfortable. Not everybody's going to be comfortable with social media, and some people don't want you coming to their house, and some people don't want to come to a meeting. So I think it's a mix of where people are comfortable taking that information to them. And lastly, is probably the most important thing that you're doing, Tejo, and that's the education. Without communication and education, people make assumptions. And I think that has been critical that hurts this movement as people assume that the grocery store is there for one reason or another, or they don't know the history behind it or the fact that they have ownership in it. So what you're doing right here is one of the most critical points, and that's teaching them the history of why we did it, why it's important, and what can it solve.
I
Yeah.
think I think on that same note, what I hear you saying is meet people where they are. And another way of interpreting that is saying just because we're doing it differently does not mean I'm not as important. I might not do social media, but because I would rather be in the room with someone does not make my opinion and my feedback less valuable. I just choose to do it in a different way. So different is not it's not something to be thrown away. It's just something to be adapted to. Maybe there should be someone in the middle who's mitigating. Okay, these people over here communicating this way, and these are communicating this way. How can we blend these two sets of voices together to show the total conversation without making either group feel disconnected or devalued?
I love that. It's what Key said. Key is in the back, y'all, typing up some notes, but she talked about gifts and honoring people's different gifts because that is really how you organize. And exactly what you said, Miss Cheryl, just really understanding everybody has a different purpose and a different power. And I always say this when people go to war, like everybody doesn't use the same weapon or everybody has a different, but it's all under the same umbrella. Like they all have the same agenda, just different strategies. So as we close out, y'all, I just want to say thank you so much again for even being here and just really the work that y'all have done for people like me. I went from attending these meetings that you all were putting on to taking leadership roles and really trying to take the baton and just use my young joints to just support the movement. The last question I want to ask as we leave out is just we've seen movement from since we were brought over here and I think people always forget the progress. It may be like we have a longer way to go, but I think people forget the work that has been done before and have a hard time adding to it. So how do we continue this movement that y'all have started? How do we stay in it for the long game, the longevity of it?
I think conversations like this help because the people who are coming along 11 years later, who were not at the beginning, may not know the history of and the why of and how much work it took to get it to where it is today. And just because I've heard people say things like, oh, the reason why they put Gym City in, I'm just being transparent, is because they knew they were going to change the community. And now the community is being gentrified. And that's why they wanted a grocery store. That sounds so offensive to me, who was there at the table when the idea first came up and all the hard work that people put in who were in our community to cause that to come into being. That does not mean in 11 years that the construct around that the community can't change. You can't prevent people from moving in and moving out. Fortunately, there is a store there that is going to be utilized by whoever's living in the neighborhood, and that's what they need. They need customers. It doesn't matter what the customer looks like. Customers and money being spent in the store, that's what they need. So I think it's not fair for people who weren't there at the beginning, who don't know the history, to actually make those kind of comments without remembering and considering the history. This kind of a conversation is important. It's important to tell the history.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Cheryl. I guess I'm trying to get deeper and really wonder what your thoughts are about strengthening our commitment to community. And it sounds like communication, education is the way. So make sure y'all stay educated and share this with your friends. Please follow Co-op Dayton, connect with the work, be a part of it. Go from watching to being a part of it to sharing. We need your body. So whatever you want to do, contact Co-op Dayton and follow. But I'm looking forward to more conversations with you all. I feel like an hour is not enough, but it does get some of the job done. So thank you all for being here and helping us getting rerouted.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. See you later.